So you have this. Okay, so well, thank you for everyone for attending today. As Eileen said, my name is Dan Tilletta. I'm a senior sales engineer with Equidox. I've been with the company for about 5 years now. And Equidox is a PDF remediation tool. Now, the slide that I have up now is just so that everyone has a chance to write down our contact information. If you'd like to follow up after this call and maybe set up maybe more of a personalized one-on-one demonstration where we could take a look at some of your specific documents, go through your specific use cases and your workflows, and try to get a better understanding of how Equidox, both our product and our services around Equidox, can help you. So we are available at equidoxsales@onyxnet.com if you'd like to just reach out via email. Our website is www.equidox.co. You can call our 800 number and get forwarded to one of us, 800-664-9638. And then also, we're very active on social media, specifically LinkedIn. So if you'd like to follow us there, we do post blog articles. We're always keeping our followers up to date with the latest and greatest accessibility news and just updates about the product and our team. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the actual Equidox product so we can get a sense for how this tool works. So what I'm looking at now on my screen is really the home page of Equidox. So this is something similar to what you would see when you log in for when you log in to use the tool. The documents that you're seeing here, they are loaded up from previous trainings and demos that I do. So this is my own little personal account of Equidox. Before going any further, what I typically like to mention early on is the fact that I'm operating right in a browser. So this is a web-based application. So that offers a lot of advantages because you don't have to have a piece of software that is dedicated to a specific machine. You can work from truly any computer as long as you have an internet connection, and you can log into Equidox and work on your projects. So there are quite a few remediation software tools out there. Not quite a few, but there are a couple of main ones that require you to actually install software on your specific dedicated machine, which makes the tool very difficult to deploy. So because you have to decide who needs the software, how many licenses do we have to purchase, who needs this installed. It's shifting responsibilities that can create a lot of havoc in trying to track down where these softwares lie and who is actually getting the most benefit out of them. But with Equidox, we work on a concurrent user licensing model. So what I mean by that is, let's just say your agency or department purchases 10 concurrent licenses. That means 10 different people from within your team or within your group or within your agency are able to use the software at any given time. But you might have 100 people that actually have their own login credentials for it. There's no limit on how many named users you can have. It's all about how many are using it simultaneously. So it makes a tool like Equidox very easy to get into the hands of a much larger group of people because typically users are not sitting around remediating documents for 40 hours a week. You might open up Equidox and work on a couple of documents for a half an hour. Then when you log out after a half an hour, that seat becomes available for another user. So it's a really easy tool to get into the hands of a lot of additional users. And we feel that Equidox is a much easier to use tool. So it makes it easier to get more and more people bought into this process of document remediation because we're not working directly with the tag tree. You don't have to have a decade of experience understanding the nuances of PDF remediation. We're trying to simplify this process and also speed it up so that more people can get involved and you don't feel as intimidated trying to learn a very complex software tool like an Adobe Acrobat or a Common Look, which is a plugin to Acrobat for remediation. Okay, so the first things first is I'm going to put some new documents in Equidox so you can see how we get started. So the second tab here on the left-hand side, I might have gotten my single sign-on might have kicked me off here. Excuse me for a second. We have very strict we have this new IT system that's very strict about logging in and out of our applications. And if you're idle for a few minutes, sometimes it's kicking me off. But anyway, we're back in, and this is the import screen. So the second tab here on the left-hand side, that will bring me to this where I have an option to upload documents directly from my hard drive, or I can copy and paste URLs. So this is a particularly helpful tool because if you've done a website scan or a website audit, you might have a CSV file or a spreadsheet that contains a bunch of different URLs of PDFs that are already up on the website but have accessibility issues. And if that's the case, you can copy and paste those URLs into this field, and Equidox will go and retrieve those documents for you. So you don't have to navigate your site to hundreds of different web pages and download all these different individual PDFs. You can bypass that, and Equidox can go and retrieve those documents for you by just copy and pasting the URL. In this case, I'm going to use the upload feature. So what I'll do is I will just open up my folders. I've already selected some documents, and I'm just going to do a drag and drop of those 6 documents into this gray area, where very quickly I'll get these green check marks indicating that the documents have been uploaded. Once the documents are uploaded, I have a blue import button that will appear. And by pressing this import button, I'm going to kick off an automated process that's going on behind the curtain of Equidox. And what it's doing right now is it's looking for things like existing tag structure. So if a document has existing tag structure, Equidox will import those existing tags, and you, the user, have the ability to work through those, kind of make adjustments to those existing tags, whether it's building on top of them, changing things around within them, or if you'd like to, you can just start over from scratch. I find that existing tag structure can be very much hit or miss when it comes to the quality of those existing tags, because oftentimes documents that have existing tag structure, they were just automatically tagged at some point in their life cycle. So if the document was opened in Adobe Acrobat, there is an auto tag feature, which will give you sort of a starting point of tags. But in 99% of cases, those tags are not accurate and the document is not yet considered to be accessible. So you have to kind of take it another step further. And now another way that tags can be produced are if you've generated like a Microsoft Word document, for example, or a PowerPoint or an InDesign file. If you hit Save As PDF, there will be an automated process where Microsoft or Adobe InDesign will generate some PDF tags for you. But again, those are being built at an automated level. And when you convert a document from one format to another, you just really don't know what you're going to get in terms of tag quality. So that is not really to be relied on. And that's really where Equidox slots into the equation, because regardless of where that document came from, whatever tool was used to produce that PDF, you can use Equidox to retroactively remediate it to make sure that it is completely accessible, compliant, and compatible with screen reading technology, which is what we're here to do. Now, alternatively, if the document is not tagged during that process, what Equidox is doing when it's importing these files is it's looking for things like text, figure tags. So those would be images, for example. It's looking for fillable form fields, pages that require optical character recognition. So a page that was, for example, scanned, where it might have text on that page, but the page itself is just one big image. So it's looking for different elements when it's importing those files to give the user a head start to make things easier as they're going through page by page. So we're back at the main list here, and I've got these new documents that I just imported. And I'm going to get started with something that's pretty simple and straightforward. So if I just click on this document here, when I open it up, I will get the document detail page. And from this document detail page, I have some options. So I could share this document with other users in my group or other groups of users that are in my agency or on my team, because maybe you have a situation where you're not a subject matter expert on that document and you've got images that require alt text that you're not sure how to describe. You can get other people involved in that workflow, share this document with them so that they can access it and work on it within the Equidox application. Or what is really handy about being web-based is that if you have, let's say, a 200-page report and it's a high priority project and you need to get it remediated and posted right away, you can have multiple people working on that document simultaneously. So if you just get the report in the 11th hour and it needs to be posted tomorrow morning, you can have, your 5 best remediators all working together simultaneously. Just assign each other some pages and everyone can work together and get through that project very, very quickly. So it doesn't have to be one person clearing their calendar and panicking all day because they have hundreds of pages to remediate by themselves. So it's a really helpful feature when you have the right type of document, when it's a technical document that requires some input from a subject matter expert, or if you have a very large document, or if you just have varying skill levels of users, right? So you can have a situation where maybe the majority of the users are kind of non-technical, new to accessibility, new remediators. Well, they can use Equidox to get documents, as close to perfect as they can. And then maybe a couple of your more dedicated, like skilled, experienced users that have been doing this for a longer amount of time, they can see those documents and kind of follow through and make sure that there weren't any things like any major mistakes made during that remediation process. So it's really helpful to just collaborate within the application itself, because a lot of people have different backgrounds and different levels of experience. But most people can be trained to get documents, 90% of the way there. Maybe they just need a little bit of extra help on some of the more technical elements. And that's all very easy to share and collaborate within Equidox. So I'm just going to click here on this first page. Down below, we have some different tabs, and I won't go into too much detail about them just yet. The Properties tab will give you basic metadata about the document. And you can do things like change the title of the document if you'd like. You can also set the language attribute. So if you have any documents that were in different languages, you can choose that language attribute to trigger the screen reader to read from the correct language library. So for example, if you have a French document, you want to make sure that you're setting a French language attribute so that the screen reader is not reading from an English library and mispronouncing all of the French words, which would sound very silly to a native French speaker. I'll just also quickly mention the Images tab. This is really helpful to take a look at before you get started on a document, because you get this consolidated list of all the images in the document in one location, which is really handy to just kind of know what you're up against. If you can tell that like every page, for example, has the same repetitive logo on that page, maybe it's 200 instances of that same logo. Well, what you can do if you'd like to artifact those images is you can click on the hide all zones and the all visible checkbox, and then that will actually artifact all of those images in the document with just a couple of clicks. So when you've got, just decorative images, things that are there to take up space, to just look nice aesthetically, but are not actually adding any value to the document or the context of the information in that document, you can artifact those types of images. Maybe you want to have one iteration of a logo and to describe it once, but you certainly, as a remediator, don't want to be typing in the same alt text for the same logo or the same, watermark or the background image for hundreds of pages. That takes a long time. It's a waste of time because it's actually creating more of a problem for screen reader users because they don't want to listen to a description of a logo 200 pages in a row. Now, you're also able to look and interact with the images when you're inside of the document itself. So as you go through the document, you can, maybe get a better understanding of the context of the document itself to describe the images more accurately. So you can make the updates to the alt text from within the document editor as well. But I really like the ability to just see all of the images together so that you understand how many images there are. Has alt text been provided yet? So if there was alt text already assigned to this document, this would all be populated. Then you can make edits if needed. But in this case, I'm going to actually go into the document itself. So if I click on page 1 here, I'm going to just isolate the first of 4 pages now. So I'm only interacting with page 1. And the first thing that I'm struck by is that I have all these yellow boxes that are covering up the content on this page. So these yellow boxes, what they're doing is they are sort of organizing the content. We refer to them as reading zones, and these reading zones will ultimately equate to tags when we export the document from Equidox. So this is just a little bit of a different naming convention for the way that we're organizing content compared to the tag structure that you would hear all about in Adobe Acrobat. So these will ultimately equal tags, but right now we're just going to call them reading zones. But these reading zones were created automatically simply by importing the document. So when I imported that document, this document was completely untagged to begin with. There's no existing tag structure. So Equidox automatically recognizes where there is text and content and images, and it's grouping it together with the proper paragraph granularity. So it's looking at like differences in font sizes, spacing between paragraphs. You can see that all I've done so far is import it, and all of my paragraphs and everything is grouped together very accurately. So from here, it's just really a matter of making a couple of adjustments to a page like this. For example, setting heading structure and making sure that I'm tagging my images and just double checking my reading order to make sure that I'm satisfied with my reading order of the page. Now, before moving any further, a really important feature within Equidox is this button right here, which looks like a computer monitor. If I press this button at any time, what it will do is it will open a separate tab in my browser. And in this separate tab, what I can see is an HTML rendering of the page that I'm currently working on. So this HTML is really just a representation of what a screen reader is going to read out loud if I were to export this document right now. So I can see in terms of reading order, any heading structure changes that I make, if I have lists or tables, different elements, all of that information will populate in this HTML preview, and it gives me, the user, that sort of confirmation that I've done a nice job on that page before moving on to subsequent pages in the document. So this is just a way to check your work and kind of get feedback from Equidox to know what kind of tag structure you are building. So let's make some changes to this page just so we can see those changes come to life. So the first things first, when you're dealing with a page that has like headings, for example, I like to start by just setting my headings for the page. So if I were to select this item up here in the very top left corner of the page with this big font, if I were to set this as my heading level 1, currently it's a text zone by default because this document wasn't tagged. This is, of course, encoded text. As far as Equidox is concerned, it's text. So we need to identify it as a heading. So I could change it from a text zone to a heading from this drop-down menu for the zone type. But I can also use my keyboard shortcuts where all I have to do is hit 1 on my keyboard, and that will switch it from a text zone, which is represented in the upper left-hand corner of the zone, the little green flag. That will switch it from a text zone to an H1, so a heading level 1. If I were to set this as a heading level 2, I can simply tap 2 on my keyboard. And if I were to set this as a heading level 3, I can tap 3 on my keyboard. Now, by just making those changes, if I go back to my HTML preview, what we'll notice is this larger font where my headings have been identified. So I can see this big bold font now that's identifying that, okay, I did in fact set that as a heading level 1, and I can confirm it here visually looking at this HTML. Now, some other things that we need to consider with this page are things like alt text. So here's a little image up here in the far right corner of the page. This is the logo for the National Park Service. So what I'll do is I'll just come over here to my alt description field, and I will just type in National Park Service logo. So I'm able to apply that description to that image right here in this alt text field. And then as a screen reader interacts with that figure tag, it will read, instead of just reading image, it will actually read the description that I've provided for it. Down here we have another image, and this is a little bit more of a technical of an image because it is a sort of a diagram or a drawing of a house that these Puebloan Indians would live in. So I'm not like a subject matter expert on this, but if I were to read and scan through this document, I could probably pull out a pretty good description for this image. And there's also, if you notice, there's also text inside of this image. So despite the fact that we can visually read it, a screen reader is unable to interact with the text inside of this image because it's, as far as a screen reader is concerned, this whole element is one big image. So something we can do within Equidox is we can actually extract that text using a process called OCR. So if I were to place a zone on top of that text right there, I could then change that zone from a text zone to OCR and press this button here that says convert to text. So what's going to happen now is it's going to send essentially a screenshot of this text up into the cloud to to identify or to analyze it and look at the shapes of these letters and try to put things together in the form of words. So over here, after pressing that button while I was talking there, I now have a result in the form of text. And I'm able to edit this result. So, for example, the word agriculture was split at the sort of halfway point of that line. So it would be read by a screener as agri-culture. So you can get rid of that extra space in the dash. You're able to make these minor edits to the spelling and grammar that might have, there might be minor mistakes in that spelling and grammar, or when you have hyphenated words like this, you can make edits and changes right here in this text field. So that's just one example of how you can extract information. And then from there, let's say you wanted to apply that OCR result as the alt text for the image itself. So you have that ability to just copy it and paste it over here into the alt text field. This is just one example of what you're able to do within Equidox. If you run into instances like this where you have images that contain text inside of them, you can extract it using OCR. Now, really the other thing that I want to consider on a page like this is the reading order for it. So the default reading order for Equidox is to just scan the page left to right, top to bottom. So as it's intersecting with a zone, it's going to label that as the next number in the reading order sequence. So being that the way that this page is laid out, you've got reading zone 1, then you have reading zone 2, then you have reading zone 3, then this is 4, 5, and then down the page it will go. If you wanted to make an edit to this, let's say, for example, you wanted to change this from reading zone 3, maybe you want this to be read after reading zone 1. Well, if you were to change this from reading zone 3 to reading zone 2, then you'd have to change 2 to 3, and then you're kind of playing this game of musical chairs where you're shifting all the zones around. So what you can do in Equidox is you can actually use the decimal system. So I can, instead of it being just reading zone 3, I can put a 1 and a period in front of it over here in this order field to make it 1.3. And now that will be read after 1, but before 2. So if I were to go back to my HTML preview, you'll see that I've kind of leapfrogged that logo to be read in a different spot within the reading order. Perhaps you'd like this image to be read at the very end of the page. So you can come down here, and this is currently reading zone 10. So instead of reading zone 10, what you can do is you can just set it to a number that's higher than 13. It doesn't need to be anything in a perfect sequence. You can make it reading zone 100. It doesn't matter. It's just a matter of lowest to highest. And you'll see now it's read at the very end of the page. So you can move zones in and out of the reading order to wherever you would like them to be read, because you don't always have a straight top to bottom layout of a page. There could be elements that are just a little bit out of sync with the reading order in the way that we scan the page left to right, top to bottom. Now, if you have a multi-column page, so if you have, for example, a newspaper article or a brochure or a magazine or anything that's in, like, let's say, a 2-column layout, you can change the reading order for the page to a 2, 3, or 4-column layout. And what that will do is, if, let's say, you choose 2 columns, you will split the page right down the middle with an invisible line, and Equidox will apply that left to right reading order to the left-hand column and then move over to the right-hand column to continue on with that reading order. So you have options there to change the reading order for the entire page, and you can also interact with individual zones. So you can click on a zone and you can change it, including the decimal system. You can use that to alter the reading order for a specific zone. There is a third way of altering reading order as well, and it's basically a multi-selection. So this is not a good page to exemplify it on, but if I were to just draw a zone that's intersecting with these 3 zones here, I could change that zone to div. And by changing it to a div zone, then I can press reorder this div, and Equidox will reorder just those 3 zones using the decimal system, but without disrupting the reading order for the rest of the page. So that's kind of a rare use case, but when you run into a page that requires that type of use, where you've got maybe like randomly there's like 6 columns that all are kind of have a bunch of different individual zones, there's no good way to reorder them, but using the div zone, you can just draw 6 individual div zones and order those 6 columns in the sequence that you would like. So there's a number of ways to use it. It's kind of one of those tools that I use on probably less than 1% of the pages that I work on. But when you need it, it's there for you, and it's typically going to save you a ton of time. So we don't need that for this page. So I'm going to just undo what I've done there by just pressing the undo button. That's another feature that's built in Equidox, is the undo button. So if you feel like you've made a mistake, you can always go back. So I'm pretty satisfied with this page. I know that's a very long-winded approach to a page like this. I assure you, going at full speed, this takes about 30 seconds at the most. But I just wanted to go through some different examples there. Now, one other thing I can show you within this document, because the rest of the pages are quite repetitive, is I'm actually able to set up a heading template. So there are more headings that occur in this document. We have 4 pages in total. But if I were to find that my heading level 3s are zones that contain this type of font, so everything is going to have this font style, I can press this Use as Template checkbox. And then if I move forward in the document, Equidox will automatically apply a heading level 3 zone type to all of the zones that contain this same type of font. So I've saved the page after applying that template. And when I move forward, you'll notice that I've already got a heading level 3 identified here for this element. So as I go forward through the document, my heading structure has already been defined for me because I've used that template feature. So my heading level 3s are all here, all waiting for me, so that I don't have to think about them anymore. It's really helpful, especially on longer documents when you might have, dozens and dozens of heading level 3s throughout it. If you can assign those using that template, then you've done a lot of that heavy lifting for yourself with just a couple of clicks. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is close out of this, and I'm going to actually export the document. And I've made some mistakes intentionally in this document, and the mistakes, well, there really is one major mistake. I have not described some of these images with alt text. So if I go to my images tab, you can see I've got an alt description here for my logo, and I've got an alt description for this other image that I interacted with on page 1. But these images here on these subsequent pages, they have not been described. But I wanted to show you that we do have these output warnings. So if I were to export this document as a PDF, all I have to do is hit Generate PDF, and Equidox will put together this new document for me. It will look visually exactly the same as the source file, but it's gonna look for things, any mistakes that I've made along the way. And I don't know, a little sluggish there. I don't know why. Maybe my internet's a bit slow. But now it's putting together this PDF. And if you notice, there's these warning messages. So it's telling me like, hey, you forgot about your images on pages 2, 3, and 4. So there are other checks that are being applied, but I haven't made any of those mistakes in this document. But if you were to make mistakes in terms of your zone layouts, Equidox will give you that feedback as the document is being exported. And it will even show you in the history of the document that, okay, I imported this document 22 minutes ago. I exported it a few seconds ago. When I exported it, there were 8 warnings. I'm able to view those warnings, and I can even look at them on a page level. So I can see on pages 2, 3, and 4, I have these issues, and I'd be able to go directly back to those pages and make those corrections and simply export the document again. So the zone layout that you've applied to this document will be exactly the same for as long as you'd like it to sit in your Equidox account. You're always able to go back and make adjustments to your zones and just export a new version. I could sit here and export new versions of this PDF all day if I'd like. So you don't have to. We always encourage you to get it correct on the first try, but if you feel like you've made a mistake, or if you'd like to go back and just experiment or test something, you're able to go back in and just make a couple of tweaks to the zone layout and then just export the PDF again. So here is that new PDF, by the way. You can see that nothing is visually changed about it. It's the same document, but this would have all of that tag structure that I've applied. So it would have my heading level 2, my heading level 1, my alt text, my heading level 3, the reading order that I've assigned to this document. This would all appear in the tag structure of this new PDF. Okay, so I've been talking for a while. I just want to give anyone a chance, because we're kind of at the halfway point in terms of our hour. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to pause now for a minute or two, just to kind of make sure that we're not leaving anyone confused. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to interrupt at any time. Now, what I'm going to do, if there's no questions at the moment, is I'm going to go into a slightly different document. This document here is this is a document that was already tagged. Now, this is a very old PDF. It was created in 2007, and it's a guide for creating accessible documents, and it in itself is not even close to being accessible, which is kind of funny to me. But this was a document that was previously tagged, and it didn't have the best tag structure. But I just want to focus on like one specific page of it because it does get a little bit redundant. Again, I'm just checking the images tab just to see how many images there are. In this case, some of these pages, or some of these images rather, were already tagged with alt text, but others were not. So, one major glaring issue is leaving multiple images without alt descriptions. And this is supposed to be a guide for creating accessible documents. So kind of like a big mistake there by whoever worked on this document ahead of time. But so, as you can see, some of these are described while others are not. So I'm gonna have to pay attention. If I were doing this document for real, I'd have to make sure that I'm paying attention to page 5, because there's 2 images there that don't have descriptions. Now I'm gonna click on page, yep.
Sorry to interrupt, but we do have one question. Sometimes there's a lag with getting them. Yeah, Christine asked, does this work the same with PowerPoint? And I would just kind of add any other file type besides a PDF.
So we're only able to import PDFs, but you are able to save a PowerPoint as a PDF. So I assume that a document that you're posting publicly is not going to be like in a raw PowerPoint format. Typically, you would save those as PDFs just to have like a locked version control. So you're able to save those PowerPoints as PDF and then import it to Equidox and work on it as normal. We aren't able to interact with it in the PowerPoint format, but again, just saving it as a PDF is the best workaround for that. Now, this page here is a little bit different. So it is the same, and it is really the same type of page where we just basically have text on it as we were looking at before. But if you can tell, when you're looking here at this page, we don't have that nice zone granularity that we previously had on that last document we looked at. There is just one big text zone covering up all of the information on this page. And this is because the document was previously tagged, right? So we had existing tag structure, and the existing tag structure was junk. Someone decided to put one big giant P tag around all of the content on this page. And that's really no good for when it comes to accessibility. If I take a look at my HTML preview, imagine being a screen reader user and having to listen to this long run-on paragraph with no ability to navigate with inside of this tag. So if you misheard something, maybe you misheard this portion of the paragraph, well, the only way to go back and reread this is to start over from the very beginning again and just have to listen to all this be read to you time and time again. So there's no way to navigate this page with everything just wrapped up in one giant P tag. So what we have in Equidox is this really handy tool called the zone detector. So the zone detector is if you're not satisfied with the existing tag structure, or if you're not satisfied with the initial detection that Equidox gave you when you're importing an untagged document. So the zone detector allows you to change the way that page is being recognized. So just by moving this detection slider back and forth, I'm telling Equidox, hey, ignore those existing tags and redetect this page by yourself. So if I just change it and find a different sensitivity level, now I have proper paragraph granularity. And that's all achieved just by moving that slider back and forth. So now I'm working with something that's much more reflective of the page itself. So from here, it's really straightforward. Again, it's just heading structure. So just setting my headings very quickly for this page. And then that will, again, just proving it in the HTML preview, you can see, okay, those headings are nice and clear. I know exactly where my headings are in this page now. Now, the other element that I want to focus on here is this element here, which is a list. But as it currently sits, it's not a list at all. So as far as Equidox is concerned, this is just like a block of text, really no different than a paragraph. But we can visually see that there are bullet points over here. So these bullet points are identifying that there are individual list items that make up this list, of course. So if I were to click on this zone, I can just hit L on my keyboard or change it to a list through the drop-down menu if I'd like. But by hitting L, you'll notice that there's now this green bar that comes down the left-hand side of the zone. And I just need to get that layered up on top of the bullet points. So I have this list detector slider over here. If I just bump this list detector from left to right, that is going to automatically and instantly identify where my list items are. So based on the location of those bullet points, it's finding where those list items start and stop. So that now when I go back to my HTML preview, I have a real list instead of having like a strange run-on sentence with no punctuation. I now have a real list. So this will be read through a screen reader appropriately. So this will be one giant list with 6 distinct list items. One other thing to show you on this page, and this isn't necessarily required, is sometimes with documents, you can have things like in the margins that are redundant. So like revision dates or serial numbers that are used for like office use purposes, or even page numbers can be obsolete when it comes to PDF accessibility. It's kind of case by case in that for page numbering. But in this case, a page number is not really all that helpful, just reading number 1 to a screen reader user at the very end of the page. So this being a 14-page document, I could certainly just, artifact these elements by hitting backspace on my keyboard, and that will not be read by a screen reader anymore because I've just hit backspace on my keyboard to artifact it. But if you've got 14 pages, or maybe you've got 140 pages, and you've got the same redundant information in the margins, top margin, bottom margin, wherever it may be, what you can do is you can use this feature called the ignore zone. And the ignore zone, if I just put a zone in the general location of that same redundant information and hit I on my keyboard, that will automatically artifact anything that is intersecting with that ignore zone. So the revision date and the page number, I can automatically artifact it by using ignore. And then the beautiful thing about the ignore zone is if I go to, let's say, page 3, the ignore zone is already there waiting for me. So it will apply itself to all pages in the document so that you can get rid of that redundant information that repeats page after page after page. Even if you use the zone detection slider, moving this back and forth, the ignore zone is there. It's just waiting to intersect with that revision date and that page number, so it will automatically artifact it even when you're making adjustments to the page. So it's a really helpful feature. Again, not something I use on every document. Even if it's a shorter document, I can also just hit backspace on my keyboard to artifact zones. But when you've got longer documents and you've got the author's name or the document title or the revision date on every single page, it can become very annoying to have to think about it and click on that zone and hit backspace on every single page. So that ignore zone can be very helpful. So we just talked a little bit about lists, and while we're on the subject of lists, I want to show you slightly more complicated lists. So when we have standard lists, like bullet points, we just hit L and bump the detection slider over, and we will achieve basic list structure with just a couple of clicks. Now, when we have these more complicated elements like nested lists, this is when you have a list inside of a list item. So these are a little bit more difficult because you have, in terms of building it manually. So if you're building this in Acrobat, these can be a very tedious and technical and slow, boring element to work with. But in Equidox, we're able to interact with them very easily. So if I were to, again, just hit L on my keyboard and bump my list detection slider over, that is going to trigger computer vision and machine learning to look inside of the main list items, and it's actually finding that there are other lists in there, and it's automatically detecting them for me. So now when I go back to my HTML preview, I have built perfect nested list structures with just a couple of clicks, and it only takes a few seconds to achieve that. By comparison, even the best Acrobat remediators can spend 5 or 10 minutes fiddling around with a list like this to get everything structured properly. It's very slow, very boring, very technical, and it just takes a lot of just prerequisite knowledge and understanding of what you're trying to achieve. It's very hard to get someone that is new to this to learn these step-by-step processes in Acrobat. But in Equidox, it's very much just like point and click and check your work in your HTML preview. So here you have a much larger nested list. So this is like 4 separate layers. So again, just going to hit L, and I'm going to just bump the detection slider over. And when I do this, just give it a couple seconds to process, and it's going to put together all of those nestings for me, which again, by comparison, in Acrobat, good luck getting this done in less than a half hour, just this one page alone. And extrapolate that out over an entire year's worth of documents where you might run into hundreds of nested lists. If you're spending a half an hour on nested lists every single time you run into one, it's just it's an unsustainable model where you're going to spend so much of your day just wrestling around with these types of elements. So you can build nested list tag structure automatically, and Equidox will do the hard part of building that tag tree when it exports the document. So those tags are going to be automatically compiled into the proper nested list tag structure simply by just pressing download PDF. Okay, so that's lists, and I want to jump into another element type, which is tables. So this is, again, an example of a document that was previously tagged ahead of time and very poorly tagged. So this is some sort of template that this company probably put together maybe a decade ago. And this template, as often, different people are touching it. It could have been passed around to 50 different people over the years. And as they make minor edits and alterations to it, they're not thinking about it from an accessibility standpoint. They're only thinking about it from how does this visually look? So that as they make changes to that template, look at the nasty tag structure that you get when you hit save as PDF coming out of, this is a Microsoft Word based document. So coming out of Microsoft Word, yeah, it might look fine, like on the front end of the document, but in terms of tag structure, you get all of these overlapping, duplicated zones. This is a real mess, and you wouldn't want to have to try to untangle all of this by yourself. So again, I got that zone detector, so I just bump this around, and I've given myself a much cleaner starting point. So after doing that, if I just go back to my HTML preview, you can see, all right, we're getting somewhere. We've made some progress, but my main concern here is this table. So this table, as it currently sits, is not a table at all, if you can tell. If a screen reader were to interact with this page, it would literally read all of those row headers first, and then just random bits of data. So if you're stuck within this reading order, what is this 0.772 referring to? Which row is that in? Which column? Who could say? This is utterly useless to a screen reader user as it currently sits. So what I'll do is I'm just going to expand this zone and just cover up the entire table with a single zone. And by doing that, I can then hit T on my keyboard or change it to a table through the drop-down menu. And then I have this table editor button that will appear. So this table editor button will isolate this table for myself. So now I'm just looking at the table on its own. None of the other elements on the page are, I'm not looking at them right now. I'm just working on this one table. And the table itself will give you these green grid lines that Equidox is trying to basically just figure out like the cell structure of this table. And it's done an okay job. It's got the columns basically spot on, but it could do a little bit better with the rows. So all I have to do is bump these detection sliders around. And by doing that, you'll see that I can get everything lined up perfectly. And this is, again, using computer vision and machine learning. So I'm able to capture this table and the cell structure of it almost instantaneously just by using this series of slider tools. And if I go to my HTML preview, what I'll see is instead of having that like sort of mishmash of jumbled data, I now have a real table. And so the idea of this table structure is that as a user is navigating through the table data, whichever cell they're in, they always know which row and which column they're orientated in. So using scope. So if a user finds himself in this cell, they know that they're in the lithium row. They know that they're in the cast number column. So they're freely able to navigate through this table, this data table, and always know where they're located. So they always have that information about their row header and their column header. Now, tables can get slightly, they can get more complicated, of course. That's a pretty standard table. But that's basically the workflow that you can expect to go through when it comes to table remediation. Those table detection sliders are incredible. It doesn't matter how many rows and columns there are. It doesn't matter how big the table is. Those table detection sliders, and using the computer vision and machine learning, they nail table structure almost every time. I've been working with this for years, and it still boggles my mind that the way that we're able to detect table structures. So that's really all I wanted to show like in this document. I can jump into a different document that has a slightly more complicated table. So let's just jump over here to this very quickly. So here's a table that's a little bit different because what you've got in it are spanning column headers. So you've got multiple years up here, and you've got 2 rows of column headers. So both the year and the individual quarters, those are both going to be column headers. So if I were to just, again, draw the table zone, hit T, and open up the table editor. Okay, I didn't get the best auto detection, but we're not worried about that because we're going to use these sliders anyway. So you can see, just again, moving those sliders around, I've got my cells detected perfectly. You can also make adjustments to them by moving them left and right, but you're not trying to get it lined up with the grid lines. It's really just about capturing the data itself inside of the cells. The green grid lines are not there for aesthetics. It's really just to capture the data. So let's take a look at the HTML preview. And okay, it looks like a table. We're not too far off here. But the issue is that the year 2017 and 18, those are being split into 2 separate cells. And then you've got, opposite sides of it, you've got blank cells. And then also your individual quarters, your Q1s through Q4s, those need to be exported as column headers as well. So first things first is let's span across these 4 cells here. So all I have to do is click in this cell above Q1, hold Shift, and then click above Q4, and then press S on my keyboard. And that will span those 4 cells. So when I go back to the preview, you'll notice now, instead of having those multiple iterations of the year and the blank cells, I've spanned across those 4 columns. And then the next thing to change is the fact that I have multiple column headers. So by default, Equidox assumes that your column and row headers are at a 1-to-1 ratio. So you have your top row are your column headers, your far left column are your row headers. But in this case, we have 2 column headers. So all I have to do is change the 1 to 2. And when I do that, when I go back to my HTML preview, I now have that bold font to just confirm that I've got 2 rows of column headers identified. So again, the idea of this table structure is that if a user is in this cell here, they know that they are in the sales row. They know that the year is 2018, and they know they are in the second quarter of 2018. So all of that information is now structured appropriately for them. And all I have to do is export the document. I don't have to build the individual table tags for this table, which could literally take a half an hour for a table like this. I mean, seriously, you can spend 30 minutes messing around with this table. And that's if you're trained and know exactly what you're doing in Acrobat. So very, very complicated elements are really simple in Equidox. Another thing that we do is that we will automatically write the table summary for you. So this is handy because regardless of who's remediating the document, you'll know exactly, regardless of who's remediating the document, you're going to get consistent table summaries produced. So table summaries are helpful for more complicated tables especially, but it's just indicating like how many rows there are, how many columns, the fact that there are multiple column headers. The column headers contain spans. It's letting you know this type of information ahead of time so that as the user is going to enter that table, they have an idea like, okay, that there's multiple column headers here and that things are spanned across, and it's giving them an idea of how large the table is, how complicated the table is going to be, and all of that is automatically generated in this table summary for you. So that's a really helpful feature. It's also just a compliance thing. So tables need table summaries. So we produce that automatically for you, so you never even have to think about it. The last thing I would say about Equidox is the fact that we do have a lot of support built into the application. So there is a help feature down here. So this help and support feature is always available to you. If you'd like to ask us a question, if you're having issues with a document, this is built into the application. You can always get in touch with us. Our team is standing by, ready to help with anything they can. The other thing is that we have a help feature here, and the help feature contains information like release notes. So if we push out a new version of Equidox, which we do quarterly, typically every 3 months or so, we have a new one coming up very soon. And that is going to, they're almost like a training guide. It will open in a separate tab, and you can see the most recent release notes, giving you kind of instructions and screenshots on how to use the new feature in Equidox or any sort of enhancements or changes we've made. You also have an end user guide. So the end user guide is a Drupal site. So this is built in, and if you have questions like, again, going back to tables, let's say you're stuck on tables for whatever reason, you have a tables section within this end user guide, a link to a tables video, which will open up, and even more granular information about the tables down below. So this is all built into the end user guide. This is always available to you. And we also have a link to a library of training videos on YouTube. So there's something like 30 different videos on here. And these are always available to you as well. So there's a lot of resources in the application to help you get the most out of Equidox. And we, of course, provide training when you purchase licenses. So if your agency or department wants to purchase a package of licenses, we do include 3 hours of training. So you'll get to spend time with me, and I will go through the basics, make sure everyone understands how to use Equidox and get the most out of it. And then after maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever we'd like, it's up to you. After everyone's had a chance to play around and experiment with it, we get together for a second training, and I can help you troubleshoot and work through your documents, go through your examples, and make sure that, again, you're getting the most out of the tool. So that's all included with the purchase of the application. And then one other thing I'll say before opening it up to questions is we also offer services. So if your agency or your department has a lot of documents and you don't have the bandwidth to remediate it yourself, whether it's using Equidox or another tool, you are able to send documents to us for remediation services, and that's charged like on a per page fee. So it depends on the complexity and the volume and sort of your deadlines that we need to adhere to. There's different factors that go into the pricing for it, but if you'd like to talk more about that, that's certainly something that we can offer. So again, if you don't have the technical expertise, if you don't have the staff, or if you just don't have the technical know-how to do this yourself, never fear. We're still here to support you through the form of our services. So with that said, we've got at least 5 minutes left, and I have more time if anyone would like to stay and chat longer. But if there's any questions at all, please feel free to shoot away.
Dan, we do have one question, and that is, when you've completed a PDF document and it is accessible, do you know if it can be read by the Duxbury software that makes Braille?
The Duxbury software, I would have to look into that. One thing you can do within Equidox, and I didn't touch too much on this, is you are able to export documents in an HTML format. So that might be something that can be converted into Braille. We really only tag the document. So I'm not sure how the Duxbury Braille software works, but if it's reading from the tag structure or content tree, I'm not sure how it's working within the PDF. I can check on that and get back to you, but I don't know offhand. The HTML that you can export, it's really like what we're looking at here in our HTML preview page. It would really just string together the entire document as one big HTML file. And perhaps that might be more compatible with the Duxbury Braille software. I'm not quite sure because I'm not familiar with that tool. We're typically tagging documents for text-to-speech tools. So your NVDAs, your JAWS screen reader, just making it so that users who are screen reader reliant are able to navigate it through the tag structure.
Fair enough, thank you. And then I just want to give everyone an okay to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, or if you would like to type it in the chat box, I'll read your question.
And if people are typing a question right now, I'll just, while we're on this page, one other thing I can mention is this zones feature. This is a newer feature, and it's kind of like an add-on feature to Equidox. But we talked a lot about those zones today when we're looking at the PDF and we're setting up those reading zones. What we're able to do in Equidox is download those zones and then reapply them to other versions of this document. So if you have heavily templatized documents, things that go through maybe minor alterations week to week or month to month, or if you've, like I said, templatized documents where maybe just, the date changes every year, you can apply that zone layout from a previous version that you've already remediated without having to go back and touch things like on a page by page level. So there's different use cases for it, but it's a massive time saver when the right document comes along and you're like, oh, I just remediated a document that looks exactly like this, 2 weeks ago. You can download the zones and apply that to that new version of the document so that can really save a ton of time. One common thing that we see as part of our services is clients will send us a document and they'll be like, oh, this is a super high priority. We have to have this remediated in 2 days. And then our remediation services team will rush through it. They'll remediate it. And then that client will say, oh, by the way, we missed a couple of typos in our final proofreading. So here's a new PDF. And we also need this back in a couple of days. And it's like, well, that's kind of a problem because each PDF is separate from one another. So we remediate one version of a PDF. The new version has none of that accessibility built into it. So previously, we would have to start over from scratch and remediate the entire document again. But now we can just transfer the zones from that old version over to the new version so that that minor typo that was corrected, it's only taking a couple of seconds to transfer the zones. So instead of remediating a 200-page long annual report from scratch, we're spending 30 seconds to transfer the zones over, and we're already done and ready to post it. So there's a number of ways that you can leverage that technology, but it's super helpful if you run into instances like that where documents go through minor edits, typos were found, just slight modifications, or anything that's heavily templatized.
Well, that's so handy. There's been so many things you've pointed out that would make things easier to make this PDF accessible. Can we wrap this up, talk about how people can contact you, find out about pricing and
Sure.
maybe doing a more one-on-one demo?
Sure, absolutely. So I do demos all the time, every day. So feel free if you'd like to, have more of a one-on-one demonstration. You can send me sample documents. I'm happy to use your examples. But this is our contact information. So again, the best way to reach out, through our website is fine, www.equidox.co, or email us at equidoxsales@onyxnet.com. And like I said, we are active on LinkedIn. We also do a monthly webinar. So it's usually like towards the end of the month on one of the later Wednesdays in the month. And that's typically 2 p.m. Eastern time. So I think it would be 1 p.m. for you. But we go through just different topics related to sometimes Equidox, sometimes just PDF accessibility in general, kind of some exciting technologies that we're developing. So it's another way to just kind of keep in touch with us. If you'd like to sign up for those webinars, that can be done either through our website or if Pat Bova, who's on this call, he hasn't spoken yet, but if he's on this call, I'm sure he'll be reaching out to everyone as well. So if you'd like to engage with us further, set up more of a personal one-on-one demo, we're happy to do that anytime. So yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch, and I appreciate everyone for joining today.
Mm-hmm. Dan, you hit it right in the head. So anybody would like to get a hold of me, again, www.equidox.com. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions and provide pricing as well. So